Cool. So welcome to Signature 2020, everyone. We are thrilled to have each of you here this week. My name is Solvay. I'm the Western District Secretary Treasurer. And before we begin, we ask you to please update your name to show your name, chapter, and pronouns. We are joined here today by Neil Bleiweiss, who is the Southeast District Counselor, or one of them, and he will be sharing his presentation about Robert's Rules.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. This is, I think, my first time doing anything for the West, so I'm excited to be here and talking to you all. But let me go ahead and share my screen. This one, share. Okay. So I gotta move the little icon, present, come on. Okay. I am hopeful that everyone can see my screen. I assume so because technology works. So like Solvay was saying, I am here to chat with you all about Robert's Rules. So my first thing that I ask is please use them, please. They are very important to our business and how we function and are very useful when used well and accurately. So as Solvay said, my name is Neil Bleiweiss. I'm one of the Southeast District Counselors. I'm from the Alpha Omega chapter at Florida State University. I still live in the state of Florida now. I actually work at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, if anyone's familiar with the state. What I do for my real life job is I work with USF Health and I recruit prospective students for our graduate and professional programs in the health programs. So if anyone's interested in our med school or PA or anything like that, find me later, we can chat. One warning before I get into this presentation is that I have decided, instead of using normal graphics, hence this silly headshot that I took on Snapchat, I instead am only using weird stock photos. So I hope that you're excited because they are truly bizarre, but I figured it might help us all stay more engaged if there are silly things to look at on screen. So we'll find out. So before we actually get started, of course, an outline. So we're going to talk about Robert's Rules themselves, some of the basics. We might have a little bit of practice, talk about committees and meetings, agendas, and then constitutions and policies. So I hope you're all excited. So who even is Robert anyway? Full disclosure, it is not this man with an egg on his head. Robert, in terms of Robert's Rules, was Henry Martin Robert. He was actually a general in the US Army, if I remember correctly. And he and his relative wrote the first edition of Robert's Rules. Essentially, it was taken from the practices of Congress to apply to non-governmental bodies. So different organizations, nonprofit groups, so on and so forth. We are currently on the 11th edition, which was written back in 2011. But can anyone tell me just why we use Robert's Rules? Any thoughts on that? Opinions? Feel free to either type it in chat or say it out loud. I honestly can't figure out where the chat is. Yes, it is. Aha. To make a meeting efficient. Yes, JJ, exactly. Anybody else on why we use Robert's Rules? No pressure. No worries. No? Okay, that's okay too. So yes, definitely to operationalize and streamline how we do things, make sure our minutes are effective, which Solvay is going to talk a little bit more about later, and that we are practicing things in a way that makes sense and is easy to follow, especially in the event that someone else were to look at our operations and try to understand what was happening. So that said, the basics. I'm not sure of everyone's familiarity with Robert's Rules, if I'm being totally honest. I don't know how many people have used it before, how many haven't. But what I wanted to include here was kind of some high points about how things should operate. So to do certain things, you'll say something specific, and then there are a sequence of different rules that relate to that. So to just kind of quickly go through those. So in order to make a motion, which is the very most basic principle of using Robert's Rules, you would say, I move to / that, whatever. Essentially, your sentence just starts with, I move to, insert rest of motion here. this interruption column. So some things within Robert's rules, you can actually interrupt the person who's currently speaking. Generally speaking, it's not something you can do most of the time, with the exception of a few very specific exceptions. Oftentimes, a motion will require a second, so all you need is a person to say second to that. One thing that I've seen a few chapters out here in the Southeast do, and I don't know if it's happened in any of your chapters or if you've seen people do it, but I have seen a chapter require 2 seconds. You only need 1. So if someone gives you a second, you don't need a second on your motion, just the 1. Additionally, not all motions and not all pieces of parliamentary procedure have discussion. You don't necessarily have to talk about every single thing that happens in your meeting. And even if it does allow discussion, you again don't always have to have discussion. Amendments, not everything can be amended. Some can, and you can essentially stack in as many amendments as you'd like, but for each amendment you go into, you've got to kind of work your way back out as you go on. Essentially, when it comes to voting, pretty much everything is going to be a majority vote. Your specific constitution for your chapter may have different percentages or ratios for certain types of votes, or membership votes, let's say, but oftentimes it's going to be a majority vote for pretty much everything. So again, to make a motion, I move to/that. You cannot interrupt the person who's speaking already, so usually the chair or the president of your chapter. It does require a second before you can go into discussion on whatever the motion is on the floor. And then it can be amended requiring a majority vote. To amend a motion, so let's say you don't like the basic motion that's already been produced, while you're in the discussion phase, at that time you can say, I move to amend the motion by changing the third word to egg, or whatever the case may be for the appropriate sentence. Again, you cannot interrupt, and it does still require a second, even though you're kind of in a new layer of a motion. And then any amendments still get discussion, can still be amended further, and then still require a vote to pass the amendment before you would go back to the primary motion. Moving to a committee. So not everything needs to always be discussed in a meeting, or you may be taking too much time and want to potentially refer it offward. So in that case, you would say, I move to refer the matter to the ritual committee, the membership committee, the service committee, whatever it may be in your chapter. Again, this is not something that can interrupt. It does require a second, and there can be discussion, and it also could be amended. So you may suggest referring a matter to the service committee, but someone else in your chapter may think it's a better matter for the fundraising or ways and means. So that can be something that's amended as well. And again, also requiring a majority vote. One thing that I don't know how often people use it, just because it really just varies. If you are talking in circles and you've discussed everything possible about a motion and it's just taking way too long, one thing that you can do is you can move the previous question. So essentially what this does is it just cuts off and says, I'm tired of talking about this, let's go straight to the vote. It is something I would not suggest just jumping into because you don't feel like talking about a whole motion. Make sure you still have a real discussion, because parliamentary procedure, the business, is still very important. So this is really just a, hey, we've talked this thing to death, it's not going any further, and we're reaching kind of an impasse. You can move the previous question. So essentially, that's all you have to say is, I move the previous question. You cannot interrupt to do that. It does require a second, and there is discussion, at which point you can say, hey, we've talked this thing way past what we need to. Let's move on. We can come back to it later. It cannot be amended because this is essentially just a conversation closer, but it does require a vote that everyone's okay moving that question. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't reopen something later on, which we'll get there in a second. But basically that cuts off discussion about something. So if you're in the middle of discussing a motion, at this point you would jump straight to voting for whatever that motion is. The next 3 are all interruptions, and so is the last one. But these 3 are a little bit different because they do not require any voting. There's not discussion related to them. They're not secondable, and they can't be amended. Essentially, these 3 points are really for you as a member trying to participate in the meeting. So the first one, point of order. So this is to enforce rules and procedure or to object to any inappropriate discussion. So if someone says something that's not cool, this is something you can say. Or if things are getting out of hand in terms of how motions are happening and it's not working the way it's supposed to, you can say point of order to remind everyone that, hey, this is not how this is supposed to work. Let's get back to the track of motion, second, discussion, amendment if needed, votes, so on and so forth. To request information, you can just say point of information. Maybe you missed something that was shared, or maybe you have a clarification question. You can feel free to ask that. Of course, you can always raise your hand for this one, but you can interrupt with it as well. So if you feel that you need to catch something in the moment before the topic keeps going, that might be your way to do it. And then point of privilege. This is if there are too many distractions. So if too many people are talking, or if someone's chewing really loud next to you for some reason, you know, we eat in chapter, it happens. Essentially, if too much is happening where it's distracting from the focus, but it's not necessarily something inappropriate or things being out of order, you can say point of privilege. Again, none of those three require any discussion, any seconds, any amendments. You don't vote on them because they are just you saying, hey, I want to check on this thing, I missed it, or this is out of order, or I can't hear you, what happened? So don't be afraid to use those. They are the most, I would say almost the most passive pieces to Robert's Rules because they can be used at any time. And then the last one, this can be one of the most complicated pieces because you can do it for a vote. So you can reopen a motion that you've already discussed. This can also include elections because you may have elected an officer and someone might want to reopen that election because maybe they changed their mind after they voted. That is a real thing that can happen, in which case you would move to reopen whatever, either the motion or the vote or the election, whatever. The thing that's very nuanced about this, which is why I have a little asterisk, is because in order to do this one, you have to have voted yes or in favor of whatever that motion or vote was. So you cannot have voted against it in order to do this per parliamentary procedure. So again, that's why it can get a little weird with an election. But for other motions, if you voted in favor of passing $20 to the fundraising committee to do whatever, and then you said, actually, wait, I don't think so, but you know you voted yes, you can move to reopen that motion. This one can interrupt because oftentimes in this case, it's a, oh, wait, I changed my mind, let me say it. Again, with these interruptions, still be respectful. You're still sisters, you're still working together in a chapter, and you're all hopefully still friends. So just be sure that you're still respecting each other if you are using an interruption. Just like any other motion, this does require a second. You can discuss it, and hopefully you do, because you'll want to be clear on why you're trying to reopen this motion, vote, whatever. It can be amended. So you could change it to only reopen part of something specific, or maybe you said the wrong thing and you move to reopen the wrong motion and instead meant to do something else. You can amend that and fix that. And again, that does require a majority vote. And then down here at the very bottom, I have quorum. Quorum is a very important word regarding business. Essentially, in order to run a meeting per Robert's Rules and to actually start your meeting, you have to have half plus one of all of your active membership. So essentially, let's say that you have a chapter of 40 people. In order to actually start your meeting, you have to have at least 21 members present and counted for in the attendance. Otherwise, you're just a bunch of cool kids hanging out having a conversation, and it's not technically considered business or a meeting. So quorum is something to keep in mind. Usually that's something that your executive board, council, leadership will be keeping an eye on, just so that way they can make sure that they have the right numbers. But quorum, remember that. So I know I said practice. So I've used our two favorite Western District councilors' names here as an example. So Alexis wants the Omega chapter to start doing Brosock Wednesday at band rehearsal, but Sarah thinks it should be Thursday. So if I could have a couple friends who want to practice some parliamentary procedure in terms of just using some of the dialogue, that would be lovely if anyone wants to raise their hands or say that they're willing. Yes, no, maybe. I can do it, but I'm not going to be as fun as you guys.
Alexis would say I move to start doing Brosock Wednesday at band rehearsals.
Excellent. And then someone would second. There would be discussion. So she could say, hey, I think Brosocks are really cool. And I will tell you guys about Brosock Thursday in a second and why this is a real thing. But essentially then it's a discussion of, hey, I think long socks are cool and we should all wear them on Thursdays because socks. But then Sarah, maybe she disagrees with it being on Wednesday. So if anyone wants to say what Sarah would say. I almost lost track of my names for a second. Anyone? Bueller? Yes, maybe so. No? Oh. Okay, so if Sarah changed her mind and then said, no, I think it should be Thursday, she would say, I move to amend the motion that we should have Brosocks on Thursday, or in this case, Brosock Thursday. This would again require a second. Also could be discussed, at which point she could say, well, I think it should be on Thursdays because that's a better day and it sounds better to say Brosock Thursday. And then at that point, you would move into a vote. The amendment would have to get approved. And then following the approval of the amendment, or potentially it could not get approved and we could stick with the original motion. Once the amendment has passed, assuming it does, that becomes the primary motion at that point. And then you resume the same process of having additional discussion if needed on this newly formed motion, and then voting. So once that vote has happened, at that point, the motion has passed as we're doing Brosock Thursday. For context on this very specific and weird example, just so everyone knows, and it's not that exciting, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When I was a student in undergrad at FSU, our marching band, for whatever reason, over time, we had a small group of people that just kind of started doing this, but on Thursdays for rehearsals, they all wore like knee-length socks. And then it just kind of spread through the whole band, which was around like 450 people. So it just became this thing of Brosock Thursday. So again, weird example, but just some context for you. Also, I hope nobody's haunted by floating burgers like this girl. Committees and meetings. So these are a few questions that I just want to get some thoughts, insight, and opinions. So if anyone would like to share, why do we even have committees? And feel free to just unmute yourself and talk, no pressure.
Committees
go ahead.
are pretty useful for making sure that no one group fights over an issue all the time. So like say we all have very different opinions on like a fundraising issue, like whether we want to hold it at this restaurant or that restaurant. But delegating to the fundraising committee, the decision gets made and the process goes a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Efficiency is very much a large part of it so that you can have a smaller group discuss this and then bring it to the chapter later. Anyone else want to talk about how you use committees, maybe in your chapter, what types of committees you might have? Is there really so?
Committees are a really good resource to like plan events and like certain things for your chapter that might take a long time for the entire chapter to decide on.
Yes, absolutely. Again, very much a tool for using efficiency. Not every motion needs to always be discussed, and not every business item necessarily always requires a motion. So oftentimes your committees can usually handle that outside. Oops, sorry, hold on, chat. Yeah, JJ, yeah, Delia, absolutely. So then once you're in a committee, how do you make decisions in your committee, and then how do you present them to the chapter? Justice from Zeta Xi says, we use committees so that not just one person is in charge of making all the decisions, so that it's easier on them. Yes, absolutely. Not everyone needs to come up with every motion and every item individually. You are a chapter of people that work together. So it's good to continue to do that. As far as presenting them to your chapter in a session, essentially all you have to do is, as you're going through the agenda, which we'll talk about in about, I think on the next slide, if I remember correctly, you just have to have your committee chair share a report. That may include motions. So there might be business that comes from that, but otherwise it may be, hey, the jurisdiction committee met this last week and we found a couple of changes that we want to make to the Constitution, to the bylaws. So we'll vote on those during new business, but here are what those changes are. We've already sent them via email, so you have them in writing, yada, yada, yada. So essentially a committee chair report or potentially new business is when you would present those. And then anyone have any thoughts on how many committees you should have? There's no right or wrong answer, so no pressure if anyone has thoughts. Well, like I said, I already kind of spoiled it. There is no right or wrong answer. You can have essentially as many committees as you are willing to manage. So that could be 4, it could be 8, it could be upwards of 12. I don't know how many you need, so that's definitely a chapter dependent situation. But you should have some standing committees. So for example, jurisdiction, membership, ritual, some of the basic business practices you might want to maintain as a committee, song potentially, service, of course. But then in addition to that, you can always have ad hoc committees as well. Sometimes new projects come up. Sometimes you're the host chapter for your district convention. So you may have a committee that you make for a year or a semester just to handle specific projects or items. And they essentially just exist as another committee for a little while. You don't necessarily have to build them into your constitution if they're an ad hoc, but you do still have to make a motion, vote on them to exist as a business item in the event that you're adding one. So constitutions and policies. What are the differences between constitutions and policy documents, and why have a separation? Really, when it comes down to this, the Constitution is things that you cannot waive and cannot easily change that really make up the foundation of your business, your chapter, and how you function. Oh, I see chat lit up. Yes, Watermelon Man. Again, I really wanted to find weird images to keep everyone just engaged because I know that this is not always the most exciting topic. So if anything, I hope you at least enjoy the stock photos. But like I was saying, the constitutions, they are really the binding pieces of how you function as a chapter. That's where you have all of the hard pieces that you've taken from your district and national constitutions that directly apply to you as members of this organization, as members of the Western District, and then of course of your chapter, and also potentially university policies as well that you may have had to adapt to be a registered student organization or to operate on campus. Policy documents, on the other hand, can have some overlap in terms of the types of things that they cover, but usually a policy document is a little bit more flexible than what you would have in your constitution. So you may have things more so about how many, for example, one thing that we do in Alpha Omega, we have obviously our little sisters, we have little brothers because we do have a KK Psi chapter at our school. But then within our TBS chapter, we also do adopted little sisters, which is just kind of a cutesy thing that we do. But in the policies, we may say, okay, you are allowed to have a maximum of 2 adopted little sisters, no more. Does it necessarily need to be in the Constitution? Not necessarily. It's more of a for fun thing, but this is so that we can track how we manage that. As far as waiving constitutional components versus policies, policies can be waived pretty easily. It's just a standard vote for a new motion that you want to change something briefly. Maybe there's no one left to take an adopted little sister who doesn't already have to. Okay, let's waive that policy so that John over here can have a third one, just so that way this person has an adopted big because we want everyone to have one. On the other hand, in the Constitution, really not something that you can waive. There is something called suspension of the rules. So that is something that can be done, but it's very specific as far as what can and cannot be suspended. Essentially, if it is anything in your constitution related to someone's right of membership or their privileges as a member. So for example, their ability to attend meetings, to vote, to take a little, to participate on a committee, whatever the case. Things like that cannot at all be waived, suspended, anything to that effect. Other pieces, so for example, moving into this virtual world, you may have a requirement in your constitution that says all active members must be enrolled in a band ensemble or in your school's marching band. Let's say that's more specific. This is a larger conversation happening at the national level anyway regarding that, with more guidance to come soon. But that may be something that you would potentially have to suspend if your school is not offering marching band this fall due to the pandemic. So it's a little ebb and flow in terms of how some of those work, but generally speaking, if it's your constitution, you're not so much waiving or suspending as you are actively changing things to effect. One thing that's important to know regarding this next question of how do you edit constitutions and policies, as you can imagine, via motions. And this is another place where it's good to have a jurisdiction committee that meets to take reviews of these documents as you go throughout the year, see what's still working for you, what's not, what may have changed, and then presenting those to the chapter to potentially update. When it comes to constitutional edits, one thing that is important via Robert's rules is that they do not take instantly upon changing. They do not start until the following, essentially, session, or in school words, semester. So if you make a change to your constitution in the fall, it should not take effect until the spring. So that is something to know, just as you find things in the constitutions that might need editing, is that it can take a little while before you may see those changes take effect. Essentially, it's following a certain amount of time. Policies, however, can be edited more quickly, more instantly, because again, they're more flexible, more malleable. For those who do not know, I don't know if you guys have heard the term or not, but does anyone know what a moratorium is when it comes to constitutions? Can't see. Anybody?
It has to do with putting something into a constitution that you can't change for a certain amount of time.
Yep, exactly that. So, and as JJ said in the chat, a set time without any changes allowed. So putting something on moratorium. So you can do this with your constitution, you can do it with other documents as well. For example, a while ago, the national delegation put ritual on moratorium. So essentially, while something is on a moratorium, it cannot be changed. This can be tricky when it comes to changing your constitution if you were to put it on moratorium, because it will take a while before you are out of that period. So for example, if you are, let's say it's the fall semester, and you've already made several changes to your constitution, but then you decide, okay, we've done a lot this fall as far as updating and changing things. Let's just see how it holds for the spring, and no one touches it. You can put your constitution on a moratorium for a semester, let's say. This would be done through a motion, so you would move to put the constitution on a moratorium for one semester. As I was saying before, because constitutional changes don't always kick in instantly, if you were to do that, so again, this motion happened in the fall, it's on a moratorium in the spring, so no changes are happening. The next time any changes can be made are going to be the following fall, but those won't take effect until the spring. So essentially, you can really kind of stick your constitution in one place for almost a year or longer, up to you. But that is something that is feasible, doable, and sometimes can really benefit your operation if you find that a lot of unnecessary changes are being made, or maybe you have made a lot of necessary changes, but you really don't know how they're going to pan out. In any case, I would be wary of the moratorium just because you can really kind of lock yourself in for a while. And at that point, it can be hard to change without having to reopen votes. And then you're going through a lot of really interesting ins and outs of parliamentary procedure to reopen things from prior business. But that said, what would you all say are the most important things about updating and managing and keeping track of your jurisdictional documents in your chapter or in your district. Anyone? This is again a no wrong answers kind of question. I can call on someone. I hate doing that, but I can. Solvay, what do you think? What would you say are the most important things about updating jurisdictional documents?
Oh man. I think an important thing, like with updating a jurisdictional document, like it would be important to update it if there was like if you wanted to add like an office position, or like if you've had like ad hoc committees come up, like to put those in your jurisdictional documents so that people know what to do, like when the time comes to have that committee. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Really what it boils down to is things can change. Life changes. The world happens around us, as we've clearly seen in the last several months. And sometimes you just have to make changes. But it's important to keep track of the changes that are made, and also to really maintain regular upkeep of these documents, because if no one's looking at your constitution, it could be suddenly a semester or two has gone by without anyone thinking about, wait, we should have changed this policy because we don't do this program anymore, or we've changed the candidate requirement, but we never voted on it and never made it part of our constitution or our policies or anything like that. So it's important to just have someone, at least one person, if not a committee, keeping eyes on these things, because they can change, they can adapt. They are essentially living, breathing documents as far as that term goes. So it is important to just maintain them as you go throughout a year or semester or longer. And then I will share with you, the next slide has probably one of my favorite of the stock images I found, full disclosure. I just really like the energy that this hand is exuding. I don't know what it is about this face, but something really spoke to me. I really like this one. So anyway, agendas. Thank you, Solvay, for clapping. Agendas, they're the best. Please, pretty please, please use meeting agendas. They are an excellent way to keep track of your business and also to keep track of things you need to talk about. You can plan ahead on topics to discuss and business to complete, or you can even include old business in case there's anything left over from a prior meeting that was never resolved, or something that was tabled, for example, until a later meeting. You can pick that up from the table in old business. Essentially, all meeting agendas when in parliamentary procedure should include attendance. You have to make sure you know who all was in attendance. Officer reports, so each officer should speak. Old business, if there was anything that was on the table. New business, this is where any new motions or discussion is going to happen about new business and things that you need to get done. And then committee reports to go over any updates from any of your committee chairs. So that said, that was the last slide that I had for you. So before I hand it over to Solvay, here's another great picture for you all. This is called Cat Snake. When I found this one, there was also a huge gallery of other images that use this weird cat snake. So it's out there if you're looking for it. Yes, nightmare fuel, but it's so good though. But does anybody have any questions at this time? We'll have more time later if you think of any. And otherwise, I did put my contact information here. You can always feel free to reach out to me if you think of anything. My email is obviously on the slide. It's also on the national website under the district counselor section. My phone number, you can follow me on Insta if you like. I haven't posted anything in a while, but you know, it's there if you want it. But any questions before I hand it over to Solvay? Seeing none, the minutes stand as is. Okay, I will go ahead and stop sharing, and I will turn it over to Solvay. Thank you, Sarah, for the jazz hands.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Neil, so much for that awesome presentation. I'll give another clap react for that because that was amazing. I love all the stock news, and I paused the recording. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and switch over to minutes, talking about minutes specifically, and talking about like how they can be applied with Robert's rules, and how you can, and some tips and tricks for minutes in your chapter. Cool. So maybe that's not it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Wait, hold on. Can you guys see the minutes presentation?
Yes.
Or are you just seeing? Okay, cool.
Totally.
Because I wasn't sure. Are you seeing the minutes template? No?
Nope.
Okay, there we go. Cool, awesome. Okay, sorry. This is like my first time sharing with Zoom. So, all right, well, hello everybody. My name is Solvay again. I'm the Western District Secretary Treasurer. I'm lame and did not do like a little intro slide. So a little about me. I am an alumni from the Alpha Chi chapter at Northern Arizona University. And yeah, let's go ahead and just pop right into it. So what are minutes? Minutes are detailed notes that are recorded during the minutes or during the meeting. They have a lot of important information throughout the minutes, such as like key issues that are being discussed, any sort of motions that are proposed, like Neil talked about in Robert's rules. If there are any motions that your members want to set forth, that all needs to be recorded in the minutes, as well as the votes. So you want who seconded the motion, as well as who, if there's any sort of discussion points about the motion, and then also the numbers. So who approved, who opposed, and who may have abstained, as well as action items. So action items are something that like my chapter didn't put into minutes, but since being on district council, we do have action items, which are really awesome to have in your minutes, because you can delegate certain things. Like in your meeting, if your president says, oh, so-and-so, like, can you get this sort of supply for the service event before next meeting or before the service event happens, you can put those action items in the minutes so that your members can go back and reference them and see, okay, wait, what was I supposed to do like for before the service event? Oh, I was supposed to do that. But yeah, I think that's super helpful in keeping track of who's doing what and whose like responsibilities are where. It's important to take detailed minutes during your chapter meetings. This is just so if there's an important discussion that's being talked about, that your members can go back and reference that at a later date, or if anybody misses the meeting, they can go back and refer to those minutes. Ideally, everybody should be reading the minutes after a meeting, just to kind of like debrief on what happened during the meeting, but in reality, that doesn't happen all the time. So later in the PowerPoint, we'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks on how to get more people to read the minutes and like receive proof on how, like, make sure that they are reading the minutes. So yeah, and then also about the important information in the minutes, not only does it contain important information for all your members, but also your sponsor as well, so that your sponsor can keep track of like what's going on and know what's happening in your chapter with your business. So at the beginning of the year, if you haven't already, totally ask your sponsor if they would like the minutes sent to them directly, or what we did is we sent them over the chapter listserv, and our sponsor was just included onto that listserv so that they know what's going on. And if the sponsor doesn't want to get like emails every week, you can always try to work out an alternative with them just to make sure that they know what's going on, like maybe a summary every month or whatever works for them. So the next slide we're going to talk about is utilizing the agenda. So kind of what Neil touched on is the agenda and its order and everything with Robert's rules. The agenda is super helpful for structuring your minutes. So if you don't have like a minutes template, or if you don't have some sort of like minutes document that your secretaries have used in the past, the agenda is a really nice way to know the layout of what the meeting's going to be like, because as the secretary, you kind of need to come prepared to take notes, and you can't just set up the minutes template and have the agenda and everything like 5 minutes before. You need to make sure that's set up well in advance so that you're ready to go once the meeting starts. So yeah, like I said, if your chapter releases a meeting agenda before the day of the meeting, definitely use that to structure the minutes and kind of structure the discussion that you're going to have. The order of the agenda should reflect the parliamentarian procedure and Robert's rules, like Neil had discussed, like in what order your meetings go in, such as like maybe approving the minutes from last week, your officer reports, your discussion, etc. So that's kind of how the agenda should be structured, as well as your minutes. As well as having a minutes template and consistent location for your minutes. So with your minutes template, past secretaries may have had like a template already in use. You can totally just use that again if it works for your chapter, or you can create something new. I have a few templates I'm going to show you guys here, but definitely just make sure it follows with the order of your meeting, and if it works and it looks nice and clean, then you totally go for it. As for a consistent location, definitely emailing your chapter after the meeting has occurred, those minutes are helpful for the members, but I mean, my inbox just gets flooded really easily with like spam emails from Domino's. So like if I wanted to look back for minutes and it's just like there's 50 emails from Domino's, I'm going to have a hard time finding the minutes. So maybe putting them in like a Google Drive folder and sharing them with your members would be super helpful too, just so that they know they don't have to just search their inbox for those minutes. So yeah, let me see what my next slide, okay. So I'm actually going to show you guys a quick agenda template from Alpha Chi. Let me see if I can share this now. All right, we're getting somewhere. Oh, excellent. Okay. Do you guys see this Alpha Chi meeting agenda from 2018? Awesome. So this is kind of how we had our meetings or agenda structured. We had the president with their officer report just so that they know, okay, this is what we're going to discuss. The VPM, secretary, treasurer, sergeant at arms, and then all the way down to like what they, what like the different chairs, as well as if we had a Western District officer in our chapter. And at that time we did. So also, as you know, in the agenda, we have the date of the meeting, as well as for each officer, we put in like when their committee will be meeting next as well. So like we have that information in the agenda so that the members of the committee are getting reminded every single like time they come in contact with TBS. It's just like, this is when the next committee meeting is, please attend, that sort of thing. And kind of like a little segue into the next part of my presentation, this little end note. I actually made this agenda, but it was, if you read all this and are ready for our meeting tomorrow, please message me your favorite chocolate. So that's just like a little tidbit of what you're going to see for some of the strategies on ensuring your members both read the minutes and the agenda. So I'll go ahead and switch over to the presentation again. Awesome. So are there any questions so far about anything? I know I'm kind of going through things maybe a little too quickly, but I just want to pause. No? All right. We'll go ahead and continue then. All right, so ensuring members read the minutes. So this is always something that may come up as something that you want to do better on this year as secretary, but there are a lot of different things you can do. Definitely get creative with it. Like you can have a message at the bottom of the minutes like I did with the agenda. So if you read this far, please send me a picture of your favorite animal, or like your favorite meme, your favorite stock image, your favorite Parks and Recreation photo, like anything like that. Have like people do that so that you can just see like, okay, this is how many people read the minutes, read the agenda, whichever. Next would be creating incentives. So this is a little questionable with the kind of climate we're going to be entering the semester with either virtual or online. So like if your chapter allows a secretary budget, you could buy like a little bag of like the fun size chocolate bars or some sort of candy that everybody in your chapter can have. And you can give those out as like for people who read the minutes and can prove to you that they read the minutes if they sent you like an important fact from that meeting or something like that, just to have something to give to those members who do read the minutes, and just kind of like noting those members in front of the other membership as well. Another thing that I saw that some people do is that if somebody misses a meeting, then they send the secretary a summary or an important sentence for the minutes. That could be something else that you can talk about as well as a chapter, and go through like what that would look like. But I kind of wanted to open the floor to discussion and see if anybody had any other ideas, or maybe their chapter uses another sort of technique for making sure that people read the minutes and are getting all the information they need.
In the past, Omega has used the like, hey, let's hide a little saying or something to message me somewhere within the minutes and change it every week so that people get rewarded, and then also we figure out who reads it.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Like doing something different every week too will just help you in tracking down, okay, who read it for this week versus who just like read all the minutes like in one day.
I'll also say too, honestly, as an adult person, I've even done this for things at work, and it works with adults too. So it is a good, handy trick, even once you are in the real world, but it is especially effective when you're still students and don't have all of your real life responsibilities to worry about too.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and just like also the dollar store has like a lot of like little goodies too. Like you can buy like those bubble wand things for like $1 in like a pack of 50 or something. So you could even do like little trinkets and give them to people too. So yeah. All right. So I think, does anybody else have any other ideas before we move on? All right. So just to kind of wrap things up, so there are a lot of resources throughout your district. If you do find trouble getting people to read the minutes, or if you're having trouble thinking of a minutes template or an agenda template or anything like that, you can definitely reach out to me. My email's up there, or you can also call or text me at that number. There you have contact to other secretaries from across the district as well on both the TBS and KK side. We have a secretary Slack set up, so if you aren't receiving any messages through that, then please feel free to let me know, as well as the Western District Secretary's Google Drive that we have shared currently. So if there are any resources or minutes templates that maybe you want to share with your sisters from the district, then definitely feel free to drop those in there. And I should be having some more resources in there as well. So yeah, thank you for attending. I guess we'll open up the floor to questions on both Neil's and I's presentations and kind of do like a big question time.
Additionally, shout out to Solvay for using images from one of the best shows on television, Parks and Rec. If anyone hasn't watched it, please watch it. It is amazing.
Yeah, it's been my quarantine. It's been my quarantine binge is Parks and Rec. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Excellent choice.
Thank you, Solvay and Neil. For Solvay, I was wondering if we want to encourage people to take notes during the meeting, or is it, because I feel like sometimes things go over my head, but I'm glad there's the minutes, or do you think the minutes is enough as a, refresher for people?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with minutes, like you should have a good, like a detailed amount of information in your minutes, but also with your membership, they can definitely take notes. But I think the most important thing for people to do during a meeting is write down like important dates into their agenda or something like that or during a meeting, so that they have all that information down. In terms of like discussion points and everything like that should already be covered in the minutes. But yeah, if people want to take notes, that's totally fine.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would encourage, if you don't already do it, make sure that you send the agenda out to your chapter ahead of the meeting. That way people can have it on hand. Or if you want to print it, which that's an environmental issue at that point, you can always print out copies of your agenda for your chapter members to have physically in front of them, so that way they can follow along and not really have an excuse for not looking at it as you go through the meeting and potentially taking down notes.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, and with the meeting agenda, it can definitely alter between chapter, like who sends it out, whether it be the president or the secretary. So if like your president sends it out and you're the secretary, then like coordinating with the president on that would be a good idea too. Or if you send it out, then as a secretary, make sure to do that. So yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you, JJ. Just in the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if nobody has any questions, that's cool. Feel free to reach out to us if you think of anything else. But we hope that you enjoy the rest of this event. I am excited to have been here. Hopefully get to do more things with you all in the future. But stay safe, everybody, while we're in this crazy whatever we're in. Yeah, claps for safety. Please wear your masks, please. I can't stress that enough. Yep.
Thank you, Neil, again for doing your fabulous slideshow. It was super helpful to have that.
Thank you. I'm happy to share any stock photos later if anyone wants.
Email Neil all the stock photo requests.
Stock photos. Oh, requests is fine. Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Please. I'm happy to.
Neil, I'm not sure if I missed it, but can you share the talking